Okay, I think we're good to start. So, yeah, thanks for having us here today. We're here to talk about designing your school grounds. My name's Anna. I am a landscape architect, and we'll tell you a bit more about what that is in a sec. But I just want to say that the reason I chose to be a landscape architect was because I was really interested in design and in science at school, and I wanted to join a profession that would make a difference.
My name's Anthony McGuigan. I'm also a landscape architect, same as Anna. And as you can tell, I'm from Northern Ireland, probably from my accent. I became a landscape architect because I grew up in a rural area of Northern Ireland, surrounded by nature, and I was very keen to have the opportunity to share the benefits of nature with people from all sorts of different backgrounds who live in all sorts of different urban places. Landscape architecture has allowed me to study in England. I've worked in Ireland, worked in Scotland, and currently moved back to living in the north of Ireland. I don't have anything against Wales, just haven't been there yet, but maybe someday. I think we're going to maybe tell you a little bit about landscape architecture, about what it is, and how it can help fight the climate emergency.
Brilliant. So we've just got a very quick video for you. I'm just going to move on to that. Oh, here we go.
The landscapes we live in have a huge impact on us. But it works both ways. We can have a huge impact on our surroundings too. By choosing a career in landscape, you can play your part.
We are the problem solvers,
The planners, the designers, the managers, working to preserve our environment, our population, our future. Combating climate change, protecting the food we eat, the air we breathe, preserving our nature, our history, and our wildlife too. Choose a career in landscape. And you could turn a waste of space into something special. Build beautiful places that protect the planet instead of polluting it. Make cities livable. Create a backdrop for healthy communities. Or just somewhere fun to hang out. The outdoor life with real world impact. Choose to think differently. Choose to make a difference. Choose to do something that really matters.
That was just a short video from our Choose Landscape campaign, which is something the Landscape Institute has put together to encourage people to consider going into our profession as a job. So moving on to why we're here today. We've all seen the youth out campaigning and asking for a better future. When I heard Greta Thunberg speak back in about February 2019, I was really taken by the message that she had, and so I went with my kids to join the global climate strike in March, and since then I've been busy building up a campaign called Landscape for Future, which is aiming to take our industry into the future by addressing the climate and biodiversity emergency. So that's why Anthony and I are here today.
I suppose it's worth really noting that most of the places that we see around us are all designed by someone. They're actually created, and that maybe isn't always apparent. It's not always obvious, possibly because some of them aren't very good, don't work very well, but generally they're all designed in some way or another, whether it's a street, whether it's a town, a park, a road, or a school. But there's different ways of designing and different people that are involved. There's a traditional sort of development model, and this is a very sort of a top-down type of a thing, which is really about professionals who have studied and they have a bit of experience of doing things, saying how things should be done. It's about planners, if we just go backwards, planners making plans, and roads engineers designing roads, architects making buildings, landscape architects making spaces like Anna and I, and engineers constructing bridges and big pieces of infrastructure. But increasingly, there's been a move towards what's called now placemaking. And that's really about the realization that collaboration is key in making good places. Used to call this great places until sort of Donald Trump ruined great for us as a word. But making good places is actually about people coming together, and the messy stuff that happens in between different professionals, how the building works with the space outside, how the bridge connects, what it connects to, being in the right place, and where the houses are, what type of houses they are. That's what makes places really, really good. And we've sort of realized that is, that's what we now call placemaking. But what's missing from that is really people, because actually when you think about it, it's people that make places. What would places be without people in them to enjoy them, to use them, to run them? And us designers, we're working on ways which engage people in that process. Because after the designers leave, after they've done their job, it's the people who live there, who learn there, who use the spaces, who work in them. And so in many ways, they're actually the experts as to what they need, what they want, and what they enjoy. And landscape architects, and Anna and I would say this, but we excel in collaborating and engaging with people. And that's really what I think is quite exciting, and that all of us have the chance to define what our places are like, what they become. And so in some ways we can create places as part of the solution to both local problems and personal challenges, but also to global issues. So in many ways, like the images here, your granny or your granda, or your younger brother or sister can be part of creating change in places, which helps tackle climate and biodiversity emergencies.
Okay, so on to designing your school grounds. First of all, what is a school? I just want to see if you actually know, and I know that sounds like a bit of an odd question, but it's going to become clear in a second. We've discovered that the same companies design schools and also design prisons. So can you tell which of these is a school and which is a prison? I'm going to give you just a few seconds perhaps to discuss this with your classmates and see if you can work out which one it is, top or bottom, which is the school, which is the prison.
Definitely shout out for this top and bottom. shout which one's which. You're allowed to shout in class if you're in class.
Okay, have you all had a think about it? Right, I'm going to reveal the answers here. Okay, this one is the school, this one is the prison. Okay, and another one, school or prison. One more time, have a little think about it, see if you can guess which one is the school and which one is the prison. And then we shall reveal the answers. Okay, here we go. This time the top one is the prison and the bottom one is the school. Did you get it right? Was it quite hard to tell which was which? Makes you think, doesn't it? Okay, we're going to move on.
So, and actually then considering the design of your own school grounds, we want to encourage young people to get involved in that process, to actually not just design them for what the needs are now, but design them for what the future holds. And as we know, and I'm sure you've heard from today's speakers already, it's the young people and the youth that will be most affected by climate change. So you have a really strong say and should have a really strong say in what happens. And most schools have some similarities, some things in common. They all have a context. And as landscape architects, we look at context a lot, where the actual site of a space or a place sits. And most of them will sit within an area which maybe has some housing, has some roads, possibly has landscape around it, wider landscape, rivers, slope, topography. And these things can either be considered as negatives in the design process of things that you have to deal with and get over, or they can be positives, things that you engage with your local community, the housing and the areas around you, engage with the wider landscape and use them as a resource for your school. Then in terms of how the site itself is used, there tends to be a large building dominating the middle of it, the classrooms, the roof over your head, keeping the rain off you on the rainy days. And then there tends to also be car park and sort of vehicular access to get buses and drop-offs in, and that takes up quite a bit of space within the school. If you're lucky, then there tends to be sports pitches for that sort of formal, organised recreation. And then the spaces that are left over, they tend to actually be quite a small proportion of the overall space for a school ground, but they can be quite important and can play really quite a massive role in the fight against climate change, along with the other bits. There's no reason why the car park, the school building, or the sports pitches shouldn't be considered as part of that as well. But in the context of considering that 30% of the world is considered that it should be rewilded and given back to nature, maybe we can consider the school ground as a part of that as well. Is 30% of your school ground doing what it can do, or what it should be doing in terms of nature and biodiversity and climate? So Anna and I intend today to give you a couple of suggestions about what can be done to tackle the really, really big issues, actually quite close to home, because the really good news is that these issues can be tackled by all of us, not just by the designers, the engineers, the architects, the landscape architects. It's actually everybody in the community can help to deal with these issues. And from a biodiversity perspective, the World Wildlife Fund depressingly really confirmed that global wildlife is in an absolute free fall. You can see from this graph that in the last 50 years, 68%, which is 2/3 of the wildlife on Earth, has diminished, has gone. And if we keep on this track, we're going to a situation where Earth isn't really a place where we can live anymore. It won't be recognizable from what we see today. The UK is no different. This isn't a problem that is in the Amazon rainforest or is in the deserts. This is a problem in the UK and Ireland as well. UK State of Nature report outlines that 41% of species have declined. But as I said, the good news is we're at a point where this generation can make changes and can make some difference. If we take moderate efforts, we can get this curve to level off. But if we take significant efforts, we can actually get back to a situation where wildlife works in harmony and nature works in harmony with ourselves as humans. And in our schools, to deal with this, there's lots that we can do. So could we look at this 30% as the world is supposed to look at, use the school as an example of the world, and 30% of it look to make space for nature and wildlife to deal with the biodiversity crisis. Species-rich grass areas, bug hotels, leaving wild areas alone. Nature will actually heal itself if we let it do that there. Trees know how to grow, they know how to seed, they don't need us. And these can all be learning spaces as well. As you'll see in the next slide, they're actually spaces where we can actually get out there and enjoy it. This is the really good news, that we can learn outside and you can leave a legacy for future generations in your school by the work that you can do now to look at your school grounds for the future. Buildings can play a part also, and what you see is this is actually on the roof of a building, so it's not really just about looking at those leftover spaces, it's actually about letting nature come back into all parts of our lives. And I wouldn't condone looking out your window in class, but if this was outside on a roof outside my window when I was young, I definitely would have been staring at this, and I definitely would have made the case to my teachers that I was learning about biodiversity and learning about nature while staring out the window.
I think this is a really good example of where urban schools can come into their own, because every school has a roof space, even if they don't have a lot of outdoor space necessarily. A roof like this can also be teamed up with solar panels, so with no adverse effects to the plants. They can survive just as well with a bit of shade as they can in full sunshine. So something like that can be a real kind of feature for the school. So moving on to talk about weather. Obviously, we know that our climate is changing. I'm sure you've seen this already, but these are the UK warming stripes showing how the average temperature has changed from the 1880s through to the present day. And it's very obvious to see that the 5 warmest years are pretty much within the last 10 years. So Yeah, but in general, according to the Met Office, the weather in the UK is going to change to having a greater chance of warmer, wetter winters and hotter, drier summers. So let's look at how we can work with that in our schools. So here are some examples of how we can work with these wetter winters and warmer summers. So how can we keep our schools dry in the winter and cool in the summer? Okay, so if we're going to have more rain, how do we deal with all that extra water, which could be, you know, flooding our playgrounds and making it difficult for us to play outside? So here's an example of a kind of rain garden planter. So what happens is the rain drains off the tarmac surface through these gaps and into the planting beds. Then the planting bed is constructed in such a way that you've got, you know, maybe a deep layer of gravel or some kind of stone underneath the soil, so that the water will drain through it in a way into the ground without having to go into the main drainage system. So it's a really good way of both watering the plants in this planter and dealing with excess water. Another example here, this is the water that's running off the roof of the school and it's being channeled into a pond. And this one here shows a car park area, and this is a swale, which is a dip in the ground, which collects water when it rains. And again, the plants can then absorb the water, or it can percolate away into the soil. So it's another good way of collecting water without it having to go into our drainage system and put pressure on the drainage system, which can then cause flooding elsewhere. So in terms of keeping places cool, one of the best solutions that landscape architects have is planting trees. And you can see from this image of a play area here that there's a beautiful blue sky above and the sun is shining down, but this play area is really shaded by the trees and it looks as though it's going to be cool, and you know, all the metal equipment here is going to be cool to the touch and the kids can play safely and not get, you know, overheated. So here's just an example of what your school car park probably does look like at the moment. Basically just a sea of tarmac, and you can see here there's a few struggling trees in these tiny planting beds. But imagine your school car park could look like the picture on the right. It's a totally different feeling. You can make grass areas that are reinforced so that they can take the weight of a car. You can have the runoff from this area when it really rains going into a swale, and the swale can also have the trees planted in it so that the trees are really healthy and they can grow nice and big. So it's just a different way of looking at the whole thing. We're so kind of stuck in this mindset of having to have everything designed for vehicles, nice smooth tarmac. But actually, do we need to do that? Is there a better way? And then just talking about, you know, the hot weather that we're facing. So having lessons outdoors is a great way of, you know, keeping the kids cool. So this shows an outdoor classroom. It's shaped like a little amphitheatre, like the Romans used to have, so that your kids can sit on these tiers and the teacher can bring up a chair. It's surrounded by trees to keep it nice and cool. And again, so talking about the heat inside the classrooms, it turns out that the thing that most affects the heat and the temperature inside the classroom is actually the materials just outside that classroom. So for example, if you had paving right up to the wall, then the temperature inside might be hotter. But if you've got grass and trees growing outside, then it's going to keep that classroom cooler. And in fact, a study in the US showed that there was a 20 to 30% cost saving on air conditioning just by planting trees outside the classrooms. So it's a really significant effect, and it's produced not just by the shade that the trees cast, but also by evapotranspiration, which is water being lost from the surface of the leaves, which also helps the cooling effect. So in other words, the more trees and planting you have in your school grounds, the cooler they're going to be. And the more hard surfacing, particularly black asphalt that there is, the hotter it's going to be. Okay, so moving on to talking about another way that you can use your school grounds, and that is by growing food. So in the UK, we actually import about 50% of our food at the moment, which is quite a lot, and all that food has to travel from somewhere. So whether it's from Europe or from somewhere further away, it has a carbon footprint just from being transported, which would be the fuel used to power the ships or the container trucks that bring it to us. So if we can grow more food locally, that means we can cut down on the carbon footprint of the food. So another thing to mention there is food waste. So we waste a huge amount of food in this country. I'll give you one example. So we've just had Halloween. We've all been carving our Halloween pumpkins. So this year, it was estimated that 12.6 million pumpkins were heading for landfill after Halloween, which is an incredible amount. So when these pumpkins go into the landfill, they break down by anaerobic methods rather than aerobic, which means that they release a gas called methane, which is a really, really strong greenhouse gas. It's even stronger than carbon dioxide, so it heats up our planet even more. So anything we can do to reduce food waste is going to be a really good thing. So for example, we can learn about composting. By having a compost bin at school, we can start to see how plant matter can break down and provide us with a really rich growing medium for our plants. So yeah, there's some other ideas that you can do at school. If you don't have a lot of space, there are these, you can grow vegetables in raised vegetable beds, which can be placed on any surface. So imagine your playground is like a really hard surface playground. Even just having a few of these is going to make it feel a lot greener and nicer. You can also use recycled materials. So this shows a little greenhouse which was made out of plastic bottles. So really clever ideas. So the question to us here is, could we grow food at school to eat for school dinners? Could we actually learn to grow food in such a way that we could provide food for, you know, maybe local people? Yeah, I mean, growing food is kind of a life skill, a bit like cycling or swimming or something like that. So I think it's something that we should all be learning. And I know you guys will all have done a lot of food growing at school already, but I think there's a real opportunity perhaps to make a beautiful vegetable garden at school and actually involve the local community, your parents, everyone.
And if you're not into the growing of food itself, the actual construction of greenhouses or building sheds, building planters, there's so much to get involved with in terms of the maintenance and the management, and really I suppose developing construction skills as well. The making of scarecrows can be great fun at Halloween, you know. So the production of food is one element of that, but there's so much to get involved with, and it's so interesting to see the passing of time, to see the passing of the seasons, to see the impact that frost has on food, when you should sow, how long you have to wait, the differences in growing periods, the things you get wrong and that you have to try again and you learn the next time that you do them. So there's as Anna says, there's an awful lot of, I suppose, life skills in terms of growing and work around that, which is brilliant fun to be involved in.
It's something that your parents can definitely help with. I mean, you know, we all know that your teachers are so busy, and especially at the moment, they've got a lot of stuff to organise to keep you all in school. So, you know, maybe this is something where your parents or your local allotment, or perhaps even if you're in the countryside, your local farmers could help out and make it into a kind of community project. Again, you know, things like choosing materials. All the materials we use have a carbon footprint, and by recycling and repurposing things, we can make a big difference in the amount of carbon emissions in the materials that we're using. So, for example, raised timber planters like this, if you ask around, I bet some of the parents have got a whole stack of timber in their garages that they could probably donate. You might even end up with the parents competing with each other to try and make the best raised beds or something. Could be really good. Okay, so taking action. So first of all, I want to tell you a bit about what we're doing, because we'd never come here and just tell you to do stuff without being on it ourselves. So this is the Landscape for Future group, pre-lockdown, of course, making our plans about how to decarbonise our industry and get it fit for the future. So at the moment, we're working on a couple of things. One of them is to really get the conversation in our industry going about materials that we're using and the impact they have on the environment, because some things like concrete in particular has a really high carbon footprint, but it's also one of the things that we use a lot. So we're kind of opening up the conversation on that. So that's one of the things that we're doing. And we don't want to let your parents off the hook either. So here's something that your parents can do. This is about the Future Generations Bill. And this is a bill that aims to ensure that UK policymaking takes into account the interests of future generations. And what that means in simple terms is that it's a bill to tell our government that when they make decisions, they need to take you into account, because you are the future generations. And you'd have thought they were doing that anyway, but I think this will make it really, really strong case that they have to do that. So there's a group called Parents for Future who are doing this right now. There's a talk on Wednesday about why this bill is important. So you can tell your parents about that, or just tell them to write to their MP about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Bill. Make sure that their MP is thinking about the kids when they're making decisions.
And as Anna says, all of us are struggling with these really big climate issues, but looking at how we actually take action for them in our day-to-day work, in our day-to-day personal lives, and of course from a school perspective, from an education perspective as well, and talking and sharing ideas and sharing thoughts in this, because the big climate issues that we hear about on the news and through Twitter, it can feel sort of inaccessible. But by all of us doing our bit, it makes a massive difference. And we as landscape architects, we're really up for the fight. We're up for this. We've seen that the youth movement has clearly stepped up to the plate over the last number of years. You guys are keen to be involved. You have a voice. Anna's demonstrated there how that can actually be made certain and can be confirmed and essentially put into law, and that you should have a say. And if you feel that your school ground could be doing more than it's already doing, and I'm sure some of your school grounds that we see around the country are doing an awful lot, but if you want to do more, there's a wonderful resource called Learning Through Landscape. It's the website's up on the screen, and we'll circulate that afterwards. It's a charity. It was started a number of years ago by Merrick Denton Thompson, a former president of the Landscape Institute. Sir David Attenborough, no less, is a patron of it. And what you can do with that there is take a look at the website, take a look through the resources for teachers and for students. There are grants there which can be applied for schools, local nature grants, etc. And then you can actually get designing and delivering and taking action from your school grounds for the future. And if you enjoy doing that, you could even consider becoming a landscape architect like Anna and I, and actually do that as a job, make a positive difference to the world we live in and to the local area that you live in and the local areas that you visit. And that's, I suppose, that's our presentation, and we'll be very keen to take any questions that have popped up along the way, or any that there are now.
I don't know if we have any questions here, do we?
I'm not too sure. There's a couple starting to pop into the question box, if I can keep track of it. Is it unfair, Anna, if I pitch them at you and you could have a first crack at them?
Okay, go on then.
Okay, so is there funding to help put these designs in at schools? I would love my school to look like this. So that's a lovely comment.
Yeah, I think so. We were talking to Learning Through Landscapes the other day, and I think there are funding streams available to do things like this, and there are more coming up as well. So I think my suggestion there would be to sign up for the Learning Through Landscapes newsletter, and also to get in touch with them, maybe drop them an email, give them a call, see what's around at the moment, see what's coming up, and then I suspect they can put you in touch with people to find out what funding is out there.
Okay, yep. And I think as a number of the previous presenters have mentioned, write to your local MP, to your councillors, tell them what you want to do with your school, tell them you feel that your school in your local area can do more, and make noise. You know, talking about climate change and climate emergency, biodiversity, environmental emergencies are one of the most positive things we can all do. So that's very important. Another question for you, Anna. What's the easiest thing, in your opinion, that schools can do?
What's the easiest thing? Oh, I know what I think, actually. So if you're a school with a playing field, I would say the easiest thing that you could do for wildlife, for biodiversity, is to actually just stop mowing all the grass. So I don't know, you're nodding there, Anthony, that's a good sign. So basically, some of the grass will have to be cut all year round for the playing fields and stuff, but usually there's a margin around the edge of the playing field, and you could just leave that and only cut it once a year. And just having that longer grass means that there is then a habitat there for insects, and when there's a habitat for insects, it means more birds and etc. So that would be a really good thing to do.
Most definitely, and the sort of the saying that you hear sometimes is "don't mow, let it grow." You know, I think after even just one season, which is 6 months really of letting the grass grow, mark out a little area of 1 meter squared and count the amount of different types of species of grass and little flower that you see that have started to grow there, compared to what has grown in an area that's been intensively mown. Because a lot of our grass are actually bullies in a sense, and they grow very aggressively, stop the other grasses from growing because they're very hungry, they take up space, they fight for light. So actually let the area grow and see what other ones will pop up there. I agree, that's probably the most easiest one to do, and it's brilliant to be able to count that and to immediately see the results of it happening. So that's wonderful. Another question in then, is there legislation meaning that designs have to be incorporated into new school builds?
That's a really good question.
Yeah. Now, there are quite a number of accreditations in terms of both environmental and sustainability, saying that a certain amount of water has to be recycled, a certain amount of power should be generated from solar means, and sustainable urban drainage has started to appear. But in terms of legislation, it's actually quite light. It's more guidance and guidelines that exist at the minute. But that's something, again, from an MP perspective and from a local councillor, that coming from the people who are living, working, learning in schools would be brilliant to be approached, both from the professionals. The Landscape Institute's doing an awful lot of work in terms of this idea of a green recovery, to put greener living at the top of the agenda So coming from the people who use the spaces and the places would be very important as well.
And it's something we can take to our professional body as well, actually. Maybe we'll do a bit of research into that and just see what is, if there is anything on the cards there. I know that Parents for Future, the group that I mentioned earlier, they're actually working on a project which will be getting funding to put solar panels on schools. So that's something to watch out for as well.
Definitely. And I've got a good question for you now, Anna, for when you've got, if you could do anything with the school, what would you do?
That's a very wide question.
Blue sky thinking.
All of the stuff we've just mentioned. Actually, I think the thing I'd really like to see is that amazing picture that you found, Anthony, of the green car park. I mean, wouldn't it be amazing to turn all the asphalt car parks in schools into like beautiful green meadows? I think that would be so amazing. But
I would put that into legislation. I would say all school car parks should be green. Should be made of grass.
Yeah, do that. But
I do like the idea of an outdoor learning space somewhere, you know, that's covered over, that it can be dry. But you know, there's a sort of a saying: there's no such thing as bad weather, just inappropriate clothing. So if you've got a coat with you and you can go outside and there's a roof and you could do some of your lessons outside, the fresh air, you know, that the opportunity to actually learn about things outside or to do some of those lessons outdoors, I think would be brilliant. So I would love to see every school in the country having an outdoor learning space or an outdoor classroom. And of course, in the current situation at the minute, that would be very good from the point of view of actually ventilation. And so even in winter, if we had a cover in these spaces, it would be brilliant.
Yeah, fantastic.
Any other ones from you, Anna? Any other blue sky ones that you might like to see?
When we were talking about quick, simple things, I think in terms of climate, there was a really good idea from Learning Through Landscapes, which was to take a temperature gun, which is something you might even have in school at the moment, you know, one of these things that you can take the temperature of a child by scanning their forehead or something, and go out into the school grounds and just take the temperature in the school grounds. You know, you could do that on a hot day in the summer and see which areas were really hot and which areas were quite shady and cool. And I think it just would give a really interesting picture of how the school grounds were performing, and you know, start to suggest some areas which could be improved, maybe by tree planting or by providing a shelter or whatever it might be. I think it could be really interesting exercise, and you could almost take a basic plan of the school and just plot those temperatures on it and see what the picture was. So I think in the Learning Through Landscapes website, probably in the educators section, I think there is a lesson plan for that, which I think sounds really good.
Brilliant. And what I would suggest as well is that you take lots of pictures of before you do anything and afterwards, because sometimes when people see wonderful landscapes or wonderful spaces, they forget what was there before, and they don't realize what ordinary looks like when they see something that's brilliant. So if you're leaving an area and letting it mow, if you're turning a little bit of your car park into green or taking your temperatures outside, record what they are, make your changes, plant your trees, and then record them afterwards to show the difference. Because this sort of virtuous cycle of making improvements, once you start to make positive change, it's amazing how the bandwagon starts and people start getting involved. There'll be people wanting to be friends of the school then to get a little bit of maybe credit for your hard work in there. So and that's all for the good, and it helps all of us. All these small actions build together to deal with these big issues that we have to deal with, and that it's very clear that the youth climate movement are up for dealing with, and especially the summit over this next week and already today is demonstrating how much interest there is in this. So we're getting told that a minute ago we had 1 minute left. So thank you very much for me. Thank you very much for watching and for the questions.
I hope we've provided something useful for you here, and maybe a bit of inspiration and some ideas of, you know, what things can be done. And it's nice to be able to come with some solutions, because you know, I think landscape architects actually have quite a lot of solutions to these problems, and we just, you know, are looking for the chance to really roll them out. So, you know, with your help, maybe we can all do that.